Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Civilian Review Board meeting. My name is Lindsay Foltz and I'm the chair. I am just going to remind everybody that in accordance with the new state laws, we are recording this meeting. So just be aware that this meeting is being recorded. We are going to start off the meeting. Are we all here? Sorry, everyone's shuffling a little bit. Okay, we're all here. Okay. We're going to start off the meeting just by reviewing the agenda and approving the minutes, just a little basic housekeeping before we proceed. Does anybody have, or I should ask Leah, do we have a long queue for public comment, or do you see a lot of people in the attendees section?
So we have one person who has raised their hand, and
okay.
This would be a good time for me to remind everyone, if you would like to be part of public comment, please click the little button that says raise your hand. If you're on the phone, I believe it's *9. I need to look that up, but try either *9 or *6. We have one attendee on the phone, so I want to make sure to get that in there.
Thank you, Leah. And I see, it looks like we have 6 attendees. We typically allow for 3 minutes of public comment. So even if everybody wanted to make public comment, I think we still have enough time within our current agenda. So is everybody okay proceeding with the agenda as it is presented? Okay, yes. I see head nodding. We will proceed. Let's move on. Thank you. Let's move on to the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from last month? And are there any requests for edits before we approve those minutes? Carolyn.
On page 7, where I'm talking, it says, I think it says something like, I appreciate, what did it say? Let me pull it up. It says that I like when officers state that they are muting their cameras for tactical reasons. I think that what I meant, or what I was trying to say, is that I appreciate when they do that, and that didn't really happen in this situation. So I want to make sure that that's clear, that I'm not saying that I like that these people did it, because they didn't.
Okay, so the edit would be to make it more clear that the officers did not indicate why they were muting, they just muted, and that caused you concern. You prefer if they mute it for tactical or for some other reason that it be announced.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any other changes they would like to make to the minutes? I see Michael.
Yeah. So get my hand back down. Figure out how to do that. Gosh, so many things.
I know.
So in the subcommittee meetings, subcommittee minutes, the adjourn time is 1 minute before we started.
Nice catch.
So we might want to correct that. And I also, I don't know if this has always been the case with the minutes. It's the first time it stuck out to me, all of the Mr. and Ms. And I was wondering if that's necessary. It seems, I mean, maybe it's city policy for minutes to indicate gender, but it seems like an unnecessary gendering. And I know in academia, we just refer to people by last name. James Garcia said this, Conover said this. And I was wondering if that just might be easier for minutes in the future.
I would appreciate that also, Michael. Thanks for pointing that out.
In which case, would you like us to change all pronouns to their?
Sure, if there's no objections.
I don't have an objection. I just wanted to make it easier for the minutes recorder. Bernadette, I see your hand.
I'm just wondering, is that, I mean, for going forward, or do we want this to, we don't want her to have to go back and change everything for the minutes?
Yeah, I'm not trying to create extra work, but okay. Maybe going forward.
Thanks for that clarification. Do you have something else to say, Bernadette?
I would just move that we accept the minutes with the correction that's been pointed out by Williams.
Does anybody else have?
Learner.
Second.
Thanks, Rick. All in favor?
Hey.
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you. We can now move on to the public comment section. So just to remind any attendees who would like to make a public comment, if you can please indicate that you would like to do so by raising your hand on the Zoom screen, or if you are calling in, Leah is checking on the technical details, but we think it might be *9 for you to get in the queue for public comment. I think we could go ahead and start taking public comment, and each person will be given 3 minutes. As a reminder, we are not allowed to hear comments related to the case that we will be reviewing tonight. And I think, Leah, you're the one who can unmute people. And I will start a timer. I'll give you a 1-minute warning before your time is. Oh, Leah's got wonderful
flags,
handcrafted flags.
Right. My kids like helping.
Thank you.
So I can do the timer, Lindsay, if you want me to. That's
great. If you would like to do that, I know you can. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try. Okay, so I'm seeing one public comment, Majeska C. Screen. I'm going to allow you to talk, and so ask you to unmute. Majeska, you're muted. There you go.
Okay. Hi,
Good.
Majeska. I'll be brief. I'm glad that the governor or the state law is requiring the recording. I wonder if you can tell us how long you expect the recordings to be available on the website, which I understand you'll be posting them to. And I just noticed there's something in the packet maybe about the recording protocols or discussion that you might have. I do appreciate that apparently there will be more time, several months, for you all to have discussion and maybe make decisions about recording and making the recordings available to the public after the time that the state no longer requires that. Maybe you all need plenty of time to discuss that, and maybe the community needs to be involved in that discussion as well. So I look forward to your meeting. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Majeska. Is anybody else last call for public comment? Just want to give everybody a chance in case you would like to raise your hand. Seeing no further public comment, I think we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is comments from board members and commission liaisons. Is there anyone who would like to volunteer to go first? If not, I can go first.
So that when we do this, I think we should go around and introduce ourselves since we do have the 2 new members. And
yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good point. So, so I introduced myself at the beginning of the meeting. I'm Lindsay Foltz. I'm the chair of the CRB. This meeting, we're going to be introducing 2 new members, Bill Whalen and Jose Cortez. And thank you for joining us this evening. We're really glad to have you here. Typically, this beginning portion of the meeting, we just go around. We have commission liaisons to the Human Rights Commission and the Police Commission. So this is a time for liaisons to report back to the commission. And then also, if you have any general comments or things that you'd like to say to the board or to briefly introduce yourself, that's totally fine. We have plenty of time to do that. So I'll pick on you last so you can hear what everybody else does. So I'll report back from the Police Commission. They had their meeting last week. Typically, the Civilian Review Board meets the Tuesday before Police Commission meeting. This month happened because the timing happened to be opposite, so Police Commission met first. They discussed or finalized the policy related to canine use with some modifications per the Police Commission. Originally the policy was being looked at to amend for dogs that were going to be used for narcotics detection, which is something that's being added to the police department. And the Police Commission requested some modifications to the policy regarding how the narcotics would be handled, inventoried, and audited. And so those changes were made. The Police Commission chair also requested that when dogs are used, it be successfully is like deployed, essentially, that it be a reported as a use of force. And so that modification was also submitted, and the Police Commission then voted to approve that newly written policy. So that's something that you can look up if you're interested. The Police Commission also put on its schedule to review policies related to public assemblies and demonstrations. For anybody who's interested in looking these up, it's policy 316, 317, and 318 in the Police Operations Manual. And so those are on the roster for the Police Commission to review in the near future, as these are sort of top of mind issues of concern to the community at the moment. I don't have any other things to report, but other than to just say welcome to our 2 new members. And I think now, Carolyn, I will pass this off to you.
I think last month the Police Commission talked about agreeing to let us form a co-committee. Is that correct? And I don't think we've met since they came up with that. So can you talk on that a little bit too before I?
Thank you. Yes. So they agreed to forward a similar type of proposal to Mayor and Council, with the modification that they wanted the membership to be slightly broader than the Civilian Review Board and Police Commission, for example, to also include members of the Human Rights Commission and then some at-large community members, and which I think is a wonderful recommendation. That is now sitting with Council, who is working with city staff to kind of chart a path forward. Councilwoman Ye has been emailing me frequently with kind of details on what they're trying to look at, but as it sits right now, Council is the body that would weigh that decision and determine the path forward. But they discussed it once in a work group meeting, didn't quite get to the point where Council was ready to vote on the specific forming of the task force, but I think that is sort of in the nearish future in terms of what Council will consider. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks for that update. So I am Carolyn Williams. I'm an educator in Eugene, and I've been on this board. This will be my 4th year. So I don't think that I have anything to add other than just appreciating that there are public attendees tonight, like last time. And I hope that that continues.
Thank you, Carolyn. Bernadette, do you mind going next?
I do not mind going next. I'm Bernadette Conover. I've been on and off the Civilian Review Board for, I think like 11 years now. On for a few, off for a few, back on just for about a year now. Lived in Eugene for a lot of years. Born and raised in Oregon. Nothing too exciting about me. That's about it. And I'm glad that you're both here.
Thanks, Bernadette. Rick, would you mind going next?
Sure. I'm Rick Rosetta. I'm a practicing lawyer in Eugene. I retired once and I've been called back to do some duty. I've been on the board for, this is my 2nd term, I think. And I'm happy to have the new people join us. We need fresh people to help us understand what's going on.
Thanks, Rick. Michael, can you go next? And then Bill, I'll go to you.
Sure thing. I'm Michael Hames Garcia, and this is I'm going to my 2nd year, my 1st term on the board. And it's been a fascinating experience, a steep learning curve. Bill and Jose, you're in for, you're gonna have a lot of questions right out of the gate, and please ask them. It took me a little bit to get I finally scheduled like a one-on-one with Leah, and we spent an hour with me going over stuff, and it was very useful. I highly recommend that. I'm liaison for the Human Rights Commission, and they didn't meet in July, but they had a special listening session with communities of color and specifically related to the protests. And I missed it. It was on the 7th, and I found out about it the next day because it was not on the normal, like, it wasn't a regular time. It was recorded though, supposedly, because it was in July. But I'm on the website right now and I cannot find the recording. But I'm sure it exists. So I will watch it and report on it next time.
Thank you. And can I ask a quick question? I don't know if you happen to know. I was watching a city council meeting 2 weeks ago, and one of the councilors mentioned in passing that the HRC had sent a letter to council. Do you know anything about such letter? Or okay, that's fine.
No, I
that would be great. I could look too. I just hadn't quite gotten around to it. And when you said HRC, it jogged my memory. So if you don't mind looking to see what letter they sent to council, that would be super helpful.
Yeah, I have to send Fabio an email asking him where the recording is anyway. So I'll just throw that in.
Thank you so much.
One thing I wanted to add, just on general comments. Where was this? Oh, no, never mind. That was for later.
Okay. So Bill, and then Jose, you'll go after Bill.
Well, thank you everyone for welcoming to the board. I'm excited to be here to start this. I spent the last 8 years on the police commission through both the hiring of the new chief and then also going through the revenue to get some more funds for public safety. And so it'll be fun to learn this side of it and look at how our policies are then reviewed and officers react to them. Will be very interesting to do that. And so I think both of these commissions are very important to the city of Eugene to look at our police force and make sure that they are operating properly and within our community guidelines. So thanks everyone for all your hard work.
Thanks, Bill. And Jose, you can go next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jose Cortez. Thrilled to be here. Although when I applied, I had no idea that it would be into this context and amazing historical moment that we find ourselves in. I'm faculty at the University of Oregon and originally from the Pacific Northwest by way of, it came here by way of Utah and Arizona, where I spent the last 7 years. So I'm incredibly glad to be back in the Pacific Northwest and to be taking on this commission on behalf of our communities. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jose. Okay, so I think I haven't forgotten anyone. Okay, let's move on to the reports from the subcommittee. So this past month, the CRB convened 2 subcommittees, one to look at our meeting practices, the other to look at the bylaws and protocols to see if there are things that we can do to make these meetings more user-friendly, both for us and to the public, or if there are other policy recommendations that are related to our own table that we would like to put forward. So I think the first one on the agenda is just about the meeting process. Unless Carolyn or Bernadette would like to report on that, I'd be happy to. Is that okay? I see thumbs up. Okay. So we basically tried to look at the meeting process and to look at the things that we thought were working, things that were a little awkward, and we're going to try some new things today based on those conversations. We also talked a little bit about meeting recording and that type of thing, which is a moot point at this point. We're going to be recording, so we can move on with that, which is great. Today, in terms of the way that we're going to sort of attack the meeting, you'll notice that in your packets, we have these new little worksheets that Leah made. Thank you, Leah. So basically, we are trying to thread the needle between making sure that we can have open conversation that is intelligible to community, that we adhere to the requirements that we not reveal identifying information about officers, and that we don't violate that any of the things that any of the secrecy that we're bound to keep, and that we make sure to address all the things that are in the ordinance. And so we've followed kind of a very formulaic, kind of scripted method of going through the case reviews. Today, we're going to try having a more general discussion about the case at the beginning. So Leah will give an overview of the case as usual. We will open it up for a more general case review where we just sort of talk about our general takes, and then we will go into a sort of consolidated analysis of the complaint intake, classification, investigation and monitoring, policies, practices, and training, and then adjudication recommendations. And so we're trying to make it a little bit more conversational while at the same time making sure that we hit all the things that we're supposed to. Just as a quick reminder, all of the things on this sheet, like I always take notes on this sheet just for myself. These are all public records, so please turn them back in with your binders. And there are these little handy boxes about whether you agree with the outcomes, agree with concerns, or disagree. And again, these are things that can be used as part of the record of how the CRB thinks the auditor's office is doing in terms of if we agree kind of with the process and what's going on. That provides transparency should in the future anybody want to see these notes. So that's just a brief rundown on how it'll impact the meeting today. And we also discussed considering having some kind of less case review, more work planning oriented meeting in August. So I'm just going to kind of float that out there right now. So you can kind of think about it. It's not something that the CRB has done in the past, but it is something that most other boards and commissions do once a year, to have a meeting to talk about process, to have a meeting to talk about any bylaws changes or operating agreements that we might want to have that I don't think we'll have the time to discuss in this meeting tonight. So if that's something that's of interest, just know that we sort of discussed that, and I think we're open to that. Carolyn and Bernadette, do either of you have specific things that you would like to add that we discussed that I am forgetting?
You did a good job.
I just couldn't remember if we had decided, that we were kind of bringing it back to the board, the idea of how we wanted to do this. And I couldn't remember the conversation, whether it was, having an overview conversation or whether we were chunking our conversations more in these 3 boxes as opposed to whatever the old one was, like 6 boxes.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a hybrid between those 2 things was my understanding, was that we'll open up by just generally discussing, what our impressions of the case that we reviewed were, if there are any general type comments about the case, mostly in the interest of trying to make it a little more intelligible to the community. So it's always a little bit awkward because we're talking about information that everyone in the community doesn't have the right to see. So to make it a little bit more transparent, to just sort of talk about what we saw, what we heard in the recordings, in the interviews, and then we'll focus the conversation in these 3 boxes. And we consolidated the 6 boxes into 3, kind of based on theme, because we found that, for example, if we just look at complaint intake, oftentimes we would kind of just breeze through that because it was like, it was an internally reported incident or it was an externally reported incident. And so we felt like intake, classification, and monitoring could be consolidated into 1 so that we would sort of just follow these consolidated 3 for the rest of our conversation. The other thing that I will point out that is a little different than many other places. So we don't follow strict Roberts rules. For the most part, we've been able to maintain courteous conversation without super rigid rule following, but I do feel that it's good to operate with a turn giving versus turn taking model. What I mean by that is that we go around and I give each person on the board a chance to speak, and you can always opt out. You can always say, I don't have anything further to add, and that's totally fine. But I find that often different people participate in different ways when they're given space to speak and can decline it versus needing to opt in to speak and like claim the space. So we'll continue with that model for now, but in this sort of slightly modified format.
And I think this was just a proposal though. This isn't necessarily how we're proceeding tonight, because then I saw in our packet, we have another sheet. And so we're just in the process of discussing our committee and then reporting, right?
So my goal was to try to attempt to do it the new way, but if you would prefer that we stick with the previous format, because we did have both of the format, that's absolutely and totally fine because people haven't had a chance to prepare. That makes sense, Bernadette. Would you prefer that we proceed just with the way that we've done it in the past and then modify for the future meetings? That would make sense.
Well, I guess once we get through the rest of these conversations, because if I'm understanding correctly, we have our original form that we've used in the past.
Yep.
We have the new form that we came up with as our little committee. And
Yep.
then we have the 4-page form, 3-page form that I'm guessing maybe came from the other committee, or is this an old form to look at?
I don't know what you're looking at. I have 2 forms, one that has 6 items and then one that has the consolidated one that we proposed.
I have one that I really like it because the first page says adjudication recommendation definitions.
Mm.
It was in my
Bill has it.
binder.
I don't have that.
Vicki?
But Carolyn, did I see your hand? Oh,
I don't
okay.
have that. I don't have that form though. I don't.
Oh, okay. So I didn't know if this form was one that the other committee came up with. And so because it goes into community values and who identified witnesses and the votes, and I don't know where it came from. It's very cool.
I don't
though.
either. So we'll toss it to Vicki. I'm seeing a hand
Okay.
signal.
So I believe that's a very old one, like one of the first ones that they played around with when the office first started.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, that's where my confusion was coming from with regards to which form we were going to use tonight, because I was thinking it was the other subcommittee came up with this form. But I think maybe our little committee needs to meet again now, because there's some really great things on this really super old form.
You like the form?
Might be kind of nice to have on our new form.
So for me, that seems like another reason why we should, as a whole group, consider having a meeting in August to talk about process. But I'll just put a pin in that for the moment. And Carolyn, you were part of the subcommittee too. I want to make sure to give you a chance to report out anything.
No, I think that's good. I would be fine doing a more conversational start to the case tonight and then going point by point. But I think that there's been enough people have voiced wanting that enough that we could try it for tonight.
Is for Rick and Michael, is that okay with you too, if we try it?
Try the new form?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay. It's not a massive
test.
departure from what we've done in the past, but it is a small modification. I don't want anyone to feel blindsided. Okay. So, does anybody have any questions about what our subcommittee talked about, or any of the details that you'd like to clarify before we move to the other subcommittee?
Thanks. It seems like a very thoughtful proposal.
So I'm not sure, Michael or Rick, how you would like to report out on your subcommittee meeting, but go ahead.
Yeah, so Rick agreed to let me take the other computer. So I was just going to go over the minutes from the meeting pretty quickly. We went through the protocols and the bylaws and just kind of hit a number of different issues that we thought could use some more thought. I don't think that we made any decisions in that subcommittee. It was mostly things that we're going to bring back, and so hopefully at an August meeting would be an appropriate time to consider some of these. So I know that one of the big ones was for me was under the, where was I at? I'm looking at the wrong one. I'm like, this doesn't look like our conversation. So thinking about community impact cases, since we had just come out of the meeting where we had discussed this, I noticed that in the protocol for us that I was basically wondering if we could make more frequent use of community impact. The protocol states that any use of force or violation of constitutional rights could be or may be designated a community interest or community impact case. And it seems to me like given the number of those kinds of closed cases that we review, we might think about using that designation more frequently, or at least hearing why it's not used more frequently. Another big one was thinking about how much time is spent on trainings for the board and whether that could be reduced. Communications with reporting parties, something that we've talked about multiple times.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Yeah, so the auditor's office stays in communication with reporting parties, letting them know that they can have their case heard by the CRB if it's after it's been disposed. But it has been unclear whether there was a consistent communication to let them know when it was being heard and inviting them to attend. Is that correct, Leah? I'm looking to see if I'm getting this right.
Yeah, I couldn't really remember. I know we have like our form closing letter, but I couldn't remember if that's part of our workflow. So I was going to talk to Vicki about making that part of our workflow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think that's basically it. Oh no, we had a long discussion at the beginning about the legal requirements around access to disciplinary records, and that was something that Leah agreed to follow up on. And it sounds like from the email that there was some information on that came through. So we're basically wondering, like, if we could we sort of hear often that there's state law, blah, blah. So we wanted to know if there was what the specific wording was and where we could locate that. There are restrictions around access to disciplinary records. Anything else, Rick?
Yeah, there were a couple of things, Michael. With respect to whether there's, in addition to the statutory requirements relating to disciplinary records, it would require us to have a change in our empowering document by the City Council to get involved in that. That would have to be an ordinance modification rather than something we could do by bylaw change. That was my feeling anyway, and we did discuss that. With respect to the possibility of having, there was mention in some of the documentation of the earlier meeting of an idea of having at least some of the people on the commission being elected as opposed to being appointed by the City Council. And in looking at the bylaws and the ordinance, it struck me that the fact that we have to have background checks might preclude an election per se, and it might be awkward to have that in there, but that would be something that the city would have to do, the council would have to do. It seems to me that with respect to the format of the meetings that we discussed earlier in your discussion of your meeting, the language in the bylaw says, quote, case reviews shall generally include discussions of the following topics, and then it lists the 6 topics. If we wanted to have the ability to change it, we might consider making a change in the bylaw to say that the case reviews may generally include discussions of the following topics. So it gives us a little more leeway and flexibility there. And with respect to recording of meetings, I couldn't find anything anywhere that would preclude us from changing our bylaws to say that we can record meetings. And I think that would be up to a majority vote of our board, and we can take that up at a process meeting if you'd like. But those are the other additions that I would have. Thank you.
Yeah, just to tag on to that, I know that when I was applying for city boards last year and a half ago, it was very helpful to me to have the police commission meetings available, recorded on the city website to watch. And I'm not sure why we couldn't follow suit. I also wanted to observe on the question, the other question that Rick raised about the possible election of some board members. So the ordinance has a section that describes appointments to the Civilian Review Board shall not be made on the basis of constituency or representation of any particular group. A candidate selection process that includes a community panel to review applications and recommend qualified candidates shall be developed by the mayor. And does that community panel exist?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not familiar with it.
It's an invisible process, right? Like it's one of the many invisible processes, but yes, it is convened. I have sat on it in various capacities. When I was working as the equity and human rights analyst for the city, I sat on it. I have sat on it as in various capacities over the years. But yes, that is something that is convened. However, I will say that the recommendations of that body are purely that, recommendations. And I can say that I have specifically recommended for and against specific people who were or were not appointed by the mayor, contra my particular recommendations. So yes, those are recommendations. They go to mayor and council. However, it is ultimately the decision of mayor and council who they choose to appoint. But that's a super, yeah. And I see Leah's hand, but go ahead, Michael.
Oh, so just to clarify that, so that that panel reviews applicants, it doesn't nominate people either.
It reviews applicants and makes suggestions about recommend, don't recommend. And you're allowed to put in comments as to why or why not, and all kinds of other things. So it is a full like review process with a recommendation about who you would recommend, yes.
I was just thinking that one of the ways of making membership on boards more representative or more diverse would be to have a committee that was actually going out and looking for people who had different kinds of experiences, either work experience or community experience, and soliciting them to apply.
Yes, and I would say that that is a perennial issue across all boards and commissions, and is something that I absolutely agree is that we could do more. I think we could do more in two ways. One, I think we could do more in terms of outreach, and two, I think we could do more in terms of removing barriers. In some ways, actually, these Zoom meetings are more accessible. In other ways, they're not, right? But I've also recommended in the past to various mayors that we have things like childcare subsidies and other types of things that can help defray costs for people who actually incur costs to come to these meetings, and other things that might make our representation more diverse. Those things have not been greeted with enthusiasm. But I totally agree with you. I think across all our boards and commissions, we do collect information. We do collect demographic data about the people who apply and about the people who are placed. So that's a good place to start. I think that's a way that we can make the invisible a little bit more visible. Who is applying, who is being appointed, right? I think personally, that's a really good place to start with thinking about perhaps in some cases applicant pools are more diverse, and it's just that less diverse people are being appointed. And I've seen that be the case in the past. So I think that's a good place to start. And I think all the things that we can do to make the boards both the application process more well-known and also to remove any barriers are good things to do and would lead to good outcomes for our community. I heartily agree.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to summarize real quick here. I hear you all saying that in terms of our own bylaws, things we might want to look at is how we do case reviews. Rick, to speak to that point, I think we have kept all of the things that were in the bylaws. We've simply consolidated them so that we will hit all of the points but we will do them in a consolidated fashion in 3 categories of 6 items instead of 1 item per line. So I think we are still adhering to the spirit of the bylaws, although I would be happy for us to, as a group, look at those more carefully to see if that still serves us or if we would like to change that. In terms of the ordinance, what I marked was the disciplinary record. So if there's interest in us having more transparency in terms of the outcomes and the disciplinary outcomes from the cases that we review, that would be both an ordinance change and likely an Oregon public records law change. Is that accurate, Rick?
Yeah, yes. You can tell whether I was muted or not. Yes, I think it, and Leah has a good working knowledge of all those statutes that are involved, and it's a more severe restriction than we all might think.
Yes. In terms of election of a board members, that would be something that would be up to City Council. That would be an ordinance change. And in terms of recording the meetings, that is something that we could all change in terms of our bylaws. So I see sort of 3 levels of things that could be changed. Our bylaws, that's something we can all change at any meeting with all of us agreeing. We have the ordinance level things, and then we have the beyond the City of Eugene jurisdictional things like the state of Oregon. Is there any other change? Oh, the only other change I would add to that is, and this is just my own personal thing, I would love to be able to hear testimony from people who would like to comment on the case we're reviewing the same meeting that we review it. I personally have been uncomfortable having to turn people away from making comment on the case that we're reviewing. My understanding is that is also not within our bylaws, but that would be a protocol change. The protocols are something that were bargained with the police union, and so that would be something that would need to be bargained and agreed upon by a majority of us to even pursue that option. So I see like multiple layers of things. So I guess at this juncture, I would just as soon propose that we have a meeting in August to look at these layers of things to decide where we as an entire body would like to go with these various layers, bylaws, protocols, ordinance, and then state level issues. Is that something, can we discuss that a little bit? Is that something people are willing to do?
Can I clarify? Does that mean that we would not do a case review?
Correct.
The entire meeting would be more
just been on process and
right.
Yeah. Thank you, Carolyn. Yes, that was my intention. Bernadette.
So historically, I don't think we meet in August.
Correct.
And I think our bylaws require us to meet 6 times a year.
I think it's quarterly, 4 times a year.
Okay. So I would prefer to make the work session in September. I think it would, hopefully will be opened up. I think having the discussions of these various things on a Zoom is a bit more challenging. Maybe it's just me. Rick and I are old, we can't help it. And so I think, I saw that eye roll, Michael, but I think, I like being able to see everyone at a table to have a conversation. And I'm hopeful that in September we could see each other. And so it's just harder for me to like pop around and see, where things are gauged. So I'm happy to go with what everybody goes with. I just know that my personal comfort and I think feeling like I'm really being heard and really hearing other people would be better in person. But, we don't know what September is going to bring in, so we could still be doing this. And so, maybe we don't put it off another month. But those are just my thoughts.
No, it's a super good point. Rick, go ahead.
Lindsay, I think it's a real good idea to have a process meeting. I think it makes sense. And with the time constraints of having the case review, it's better for us to be able to spend the time talking about the things we need to deal with. And if we need to make suggestions to the city council, then that could come out of that. And I think just a good use of time.
Thank you. Carolyn, I see your hand.
I think that part of why we talked about doing it in August was because city council's off in August. So it could be a more flexible time of when we meet. That was part of it. And also, I don't know, Leah or Mark, is there a way to update us on the timing of the community impact? Because I do think that this should happen before we start getting all of that stuff. And I think that's what Rick was saying. Or you were alluding to that, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, the investigation is definitely proceeding on the community impact. We are getting to a point where I think we can start to do more of a deep dive. Hopefully by the end of this month, we can have named employees and policy violations. As you know, from that point on, officially there are, I think, 180 days to do that investigation. I don't think it's going to take that long. My hope and anticipation would be that we can get that file to you sometime in October or possibly November, but I think it's not going to be September. I don't think.
Mark? Oh, I can't hear you very well. You might need to turn yourself up a little bit. Can everyone else hear? No, we can't hear you.
I wonder if you take out your headphones and unplug them. That usually works. You're not muted. It's a mystery. Are your headphones plugged? Yeah, are your headphones plugged in?
No.
I could kind of hear. Where'd he go?
Oh no, he disappeared. Oh. We'll wait for a second for our technology to catch up with us. Okay, Mark, now, Leah, do you have to, you're muted now, so unmute. There you are.
Can you hear now?
Yes, thank you.
It must have been the, yeah, this is not my normal computer because I just flew in from Florida and my arms are tired. So we do have 3 or 4 pretty controversial cases. 2 of them uses of force, which I think there's disagreements between our office and at least some of the adjudicating supervisors. And we also had a case where we brought forward an allegation against someone for muting their microphone during a use of force discussion, and a lot of bad things that happened. And unfortunately, because the microphone was muted, we did not get 100% of the information. So, and I also agree that for process meetings and things like that, and I'll touch on some of the points that you made. I'll touch on those later in the auditor report, maybe to give you some background, especially to the newer people. So just be mindful. Again, there are several uses of force case. One's a taser case. The other one was a person ended up with a broken arm. And so, again, just be mindful of that as you go forward in setting your schedules.
Thank you. That's helpful. Does anyone else have any other comments they'd like to make about? So I hear you, Bernadette, about wanting to meet in person. And personally, I also agree it would be super helpful. And I find myself very pessimistic that September is going to bring anything significantly different than August. If all other things being equal, we're going to be Zooming in September as well. Is August still problematic, or would you just as soon move forward?
I don't think I had it on my calendar to
Yeah.
August, so you know, it's an availability thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So also because our process might or might not impact something we want to send to council, has council had their work meeting already? Or is that, I mean, you know, council schedules better than I do as far as anything we do getting on council schedule. Because if August will make more sense for us to be able to get something to council in a timely fashion. I mean, obviously a month earlier helps, but if we've kind of already missed it because they've set their calendar in July, then I'm not sure there's a difference between August and September. Does that make sense?
Sure, that totally makes sense. So you're wondering what the lead time is on getting things on council schedule. So for example, if we were to meet in August and make a proposal, if it would be considered sooner than if we wait until September and then make a proposal. Is that what you're asking?
Right. I mean, obviously other than just a month sooner.
Sure.
But it's like, are they set so far out that, you know, if we wait that extra month, it could be next March?
I don't pay that much attention. I see Mark's hand, so.
I also think that it was either September or October that we're supposed to have a joint meeting with the police commission. So I don't remember.
We often hold an annual joint meeting with police commission. My understanding is that that was later in the fall, maybe October or November. This year, I'm wondering the viability of that, given that we should be right in the middle of the reviewing the community impact case, which is going to be a massive workload. So I don't know if that's going to be, if that timing will remain consistent or if we might need to push that back.
And that's
I'm not sure.
That's ultimately your decision. I mean, that's, you know, as a group, that's your decision as the board.
Right.
I'm going to look and try to see if I can find it.
Leah, do you have any insights on the council scheduling?
No, not on that. Not at all. I was going to just say that we had discussed with police commission staff doing October joint meeting. We discussed that in January, I think, and I'm going to staff and see if that's still a good option.
Thank you for that. Mark, I see your hand.
Usually it's a couple months lead time on getting on council's calendar. Remember also, we still have to get on the calendar for the auditor's annual report and the review board's annual report. Of course, they have a lot of issues that they're dealing with right now. So it's just a matter of once you narrow down when you'd like to do it, and then I can approach the manager and the mayor to try to find a slot for us.
That's helpful information that our reports haven't gone forward before them, though, because maybe that would be a logical time to present everything as one at one meeting. Okay. And so I hear you, Bernadette, that makes sense if you're typically planning on not being available in August. I would say that our usual meeting time is not a time that I'm available in August either. But if we were able to, as a group, find a time that was agreeable, do you think that that would be possible to meet sometime in August? Okay. Carolyn is giving me the thumbs up. Okay. So I would be happy to entertain a motion to have some kind of work planning process meeting in August to be scheduled at the board's discretion, to not include a case review, but just to look at the specific ordinance, protocol, and maybe state law things that we would like to propose changes to.
This is Rick. I so move.
Carolyn will second.
Great. Everybody in favor? Anybody opposed?
We skipped discussion.
Okay.
Oh,
sorry. Discussion. Would you like to discuss?
I just had a question. So I just want to clarify. So
Please.
We're looking at a process meeting in August with no case review.
Yes.
September, probably a case
Correct.
review, most likely not the community impact.
For sure.
October,
Correct.
probably community impact, but maybe joint police commission. November, probably, maybe, hopefully a regular meeting of some kind, or maybe police commission if October is the community impact. So then December would be the first time you would have a chance to review any of the completed cases that were not part of the community impact, right? So
I would say that would be November would be the first time we would be able to look at cases that are not related to community impact. There should be some other cases. So there's some other, officer involved. There's an officer involved shooting that I would hope is closed by November, for example, that I would like us to look at that we've been waiting for. So I would assume that means November. Bernadette, I see your hand.
So then maybe the police commission meeting probably won't happen then, that joint one?
If it happens, the plan was for CRB to host, and typically when CRB hosts, they still do a case review, and it's a little.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's still a case review. It's just police commission can't participate in that.
Thank you for the clarification. I'm done.
That's what I was going to ask, is that every other time we meet, it's sometimes them visiting us and we go about our work and they watch us and then we talk with them. And then sometimes we go to their meetings, watch them talk, and then talk to them. So if that answered my question, thanks for jumping in, Leah.
Mark, I see your hand.
Since you were on the disciplinary thing, I know that there are, because I've been talking to the subcommittee, the Senate subcommittee, it's a joint subcommittee with co-chairs on the on disciplinary records.
Is this at the state legislature?
At the state legislature.
The one that Senator Manning is on and others.
Yeah, and I think the gentleman from Portland, I forget his name off the top of my head. And if you do a deep dive into what's being heard right now, it's called LC 79, which is for layman's terms legislative contemplation, if you will. They're formatting the issues and putting them together in that format. And trying to come up with a plan. It includes officer involved shootings, but it also includes disciplinary records. There's a number of what I would call LCs that involve police records and how to conduct officer involved shootings. There's probably about 12 to 16 of those. So if you want to get into the State of Oregon legislative site and start looking for those, that may intersperse with some of the discussions that you want to have, for example, about disciplinary records. So as part of your deliberations and consideration, I think that those things should be looped into that consideration as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. And I know they're actively meeting, it looks like, fairly regularly, so that's probably a moving target.
I think this is they met last week, and I think they conclude this week, their joint subcommittee. That's the last thing Senator Manning had told me. So, and again, I had talked to him and have had conversations with him. It's just a whole myriad of things: the arbitration process, the transparency of disciplinary records, officer involved shootings, whether the state attorney general should take those over. There's a number of issues, but they do include the disciplinary records being more open to the public.
Great, thank you. So we took a vote, but we would like to vote again. Are we okay with the August meeting? Bernadette, I see your hand.
I'm just confused as to where we are on the agenda items.
Yeah, totally. So basically we're at the end of the reports from the subcommittee on bylaws. We can move into talking about protocols related to public comment, but it seems like all of these discussions are going to lead to like more discussions about what we should do. So
I feel like we could push 7, 8, and 9 to next month, since that's kind of what we just agreed to talk about next month. Isn't that accurate, or am I reading that wrong?
Well, that's what so the discussion we're having right now is on the motion to have an August meeting that would be a work plan proposal, which is on agenda item number 9. So basically we're kind of jumped ahead a little bit. And if we agree to this proposal, then we will table 7, 8, and 9 into 9 in August. Is that where I understand we are?
That's how I read it, Bernadette.
Okay.
That's my bad for moving too fast.
Well, I mean, it was just, there was so much overlap between the subcommittees and public comment and case reviews and work plan. And I mean, it kind of was all, you know, grouped together. I mean, and it makes sense. It's so intertwined. And so there was a proposal. Now we're in the discussion. Okay, I'm ready to vote now. I understand.
That's my bad. Sorry about that, Bernadette. You're totally right. I should have skipped down farther to read all the way through.
I have another question about this August meeting. Would it be, it would be a public meeting, correct?
All our meetings are public meetings. Yeah,
Right.
if there's a quorum of us.
And it would include public comment or not?
I don't think it would include public comment. So usually other boards and commissions that meet that to do work planning type issues do not receive public comment. They just meet to discuss their work. We are required to have a meeting with public comment a certain number of times a year, which I think we far exceed our 4 times a year in those 4 quarterly meetings that we're mandated to have. So I would propose that the August work meeting be just that, a work group meeting that's available to view by the public, recorded as per required, and but not receiving public comment. So we had a motion and a second for an August meeting. Would we like to, is any more discussion? Would everybody in favor vote aye, please?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Anybody opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. So now what we'll do is try to do a poll to figure out a time that's mutually agreeable to everyone. I know because we were not planning on having a meeting, that might be a little tricky, although I know that my travel plans are greatly curtailed given the current circumstances. I am more available than ever. Although, you know, with children running through the scene at any given moment. So looking ahead, Bernadette, at the, you know, structure of the case reviews, we discussed that frequency of CRB meetings. We discussed that a little bit, but I want to make a quick comment on that. That is item 9 on our agenda. So we're required to have these quarterly meetings. We typically meet 10 times a year, if I'm adding up my meetings correctly. Usually we meet during the same months that council meets, with the exception, so that would mean with the exception of August and either December or January, taking some kind of break in either December or January. So usually we're meeting at least 10 times a year. So monthly with the exception of the breaks in August and then in the winter time. Michael, I think I heard you mention, I would like to hear your input on trainings and training topics, because that's something that I feel like I don't quite understand what your vision is for how we do training. So typically what we do, each time we meet, or the vast majority of the times we meet, we have a training topic and then we also do a case review. So I'd be happy to hear what you have to say about trainings.
Yeah, it emerges from my understanding that the auditor's office receives about 400 complaints each year. And so with 10 meetings, that means that we review, what is that? 10 cases would be, my math isn't good enough to figure out the percentage on that, but not very many. A very small fraction of the number of complaints that are received actually get reviewed by the CRB, actually have the investigations reviewed by the CRB. And given that small amount of time that we have, I'm not sure that it's the best use of the board's time to also have half of each meeting taken up by, as much as I'll just use an example because it's a group that I actually really believe in, and I'm glad that we had that that training, but the oh, now I'm blanking on their name. The
Maybe sexual assault support services,
yes,
or
SAS.
Mhm.
So SAS's presentation, right? I love SAS. I've had them come in to do stuff on campus. It was very informative, but I think that given what the ordinance actually calls for is for the auditor to, or someone to, arrange for trainings for the CRB. It doesn't specify that. My read of that is that we get trained on what we need to know to do our jobs. But it seems to me that has kind of grown into a very broad education about all kinds of resources in Eugene connected to criminal justice and community support in all those different ways, which is great. But again, I would rather hear 20 cases a year instead of 10.
So Bernadette, I see your hand.
I thought this was what we were going to be discussing in August.
We totally can, and that's totally fine. I just wanted, because I heard him mention something about training, I wanted to make sure to flesh it out now so I can move it forward to the August meeting, because that was a specific comment that he made. But yes, absolutely. So how we deal with our meeting time, how many meetings a year we have, how we deal with trainings, how we select cases, all of these things make sense to me to deal with in August. And it's wonderful timing, given that we have 2 new members, so we can all move together and kind of be on the same page.
And so I think would be helpful in, in taking that 400 cases that are complaints that are made, is knowing how many of those complaints then go into the service category, where, like last month when we did 3 service complaints, some years we did 5 or 6 service complaints in one meeting, and how many of them are actual, full on cases that have a full investigation and report for it that we could be looking at. So I don't know who does statistics in the office, but Mark's got his hand up. So
the annual report has some of that information in it, so we can glean from that for sure. And then Mark, I see your hand.
It's always ballpark around 30. I mean, if you would probably do the average for the last 6 or 7 years, the average would be about 30. This year it was probably closer to 40. Leah, is that correct? I don't have the annual report in front of me, but yeah, that's normally the cases. And again, I'm with you, Michael. Again, I think we have some cases that I think are very important for the review board to look at, which I still see as a primary responsibility. Historically, for training, what we've done is, and I know Beatrice has done it the last several years, is we put together about 20 different items, and then she polls each of the board members of what that would be important to each of them from a training standpoint. Because before that we were getting criticism that it was too weighted towards policing kind of issues and not enough community. So we've tried to have that balance, but again, ultimately, we can certainly take a lead once again and poll everyone to see if they'd be interested in it or less of those. We'd be more than happy to do it. And that's gone from going to the jail, or also we've gone to, it wasn't Whitebird, what's the other one where they take the alcoholics? Buckley House, went to Buckley House and toured those kinds of things. So again, that's ultimately up to you, but that's historic. That's the history of how the training sessions have come about. There was actually the actual use of force simulator or use of deadly force simulator that people went out one year. So again, it's just kind of what would be of interest with 7 people. I'm sure there's 7 different interests, and based on experience, what your experience level is for those kinds of things. And August would be perfect for that, Bernadette.
Leah, I see your hand.
I made a poll at the bottom of your screens. You should see a little button for polls, and I just put the Tuesdays and the Thursdays in August just as a starting point. And I think I can enable you to vote on that if you'd like to do that.
I totally do not see a poll button. It's popping up in my screen now. I definitely know I won't be able to, I don't know, like right in this moment, I'll have to like.
I closed it. I just got excited about
No.
possibilities. We can do
Yeah.
that later.
If we can, that would be helpful because I need to coordinate multiple calendars.
You got
But
it.
yes, that's cool.
Someone did a Zoom training. So
Nice. So we have time for a break if people would like to take a break so that we can get up and stretch. So we have ourselves scheduled for like a 10-minute break. Is that acceptable? Should it be longer? Should it be shorter?
I could go for like a 5-minute break.
I'm okay with 5. So let's do 5. So let's meet back at 6:46. Thank you.
I'll pause recording just so you guys
Thank you.
all
Thank you.
My understanding is that Bill, your background check came through and you were able to review the case. Jose, I think we're still waiting for all of your clearances, so you can comment, ask questions, all those things, but I don't think you got a chance to review the full case this month, but you know, in the future that will be fine. That's very common in this July meeting for new members to kind of be in limbo. So typically, Leah, you will walk us through the case, and it looks like this was your case anyway, if I'm reading it correctly. And
right.
then we will try our new discussion procedures. So
All right.
take it away.
I'm trying to share my screen. Let me know if that didn't work.
Looking good so far. Ah, there we go.
All right. So this is a case. Yeah, okay, sorry. Officer A was dispatched to a hospital regarding an assault on a hospital employee. Officer A's body-worn video showed the investigation established probable cause for an arrest. Officer A spoke with their supervisor in a muted portion of the body-worn, but the investigation showed that that's who they talked to. Sorry, and agreed that the suspect should be cited in lieu of custody because the jail probably would not accept them. Officer A did not actually issue a citation and then left the hospital. 2 days later, Supervisor B was contacted by the hospital wanting to know whether they should release the suspect or if that person was going to be arrested. Supervisor B saw that there had been a report number pulled but couldn't find a report. They left a message for Officer, they were able to review the body worn and sort of see what happened, but they left a message for Officer A, who was on their days off, to call in. Supervisor B's shift then ended and they notified the next supervisor that they would be hearing from Officer A. Supervisor C found Officer A at headquarters writing a report. They hadn't called the supervisor's line first. Supervisor C advised Officer A to go back to the hospital the next day, which was their next day of work, and issue the citation. Also indicated to Officer A that their reasons for not writing the report before they took off for the weekend were not acceptable. When Officer A went to the hospital the next day, the suspect had already been released because they were assaultive towards staff. So the three allegations were that Officer A violated policy when they failed to obtain approval to hold the report, insubordination, that Officer A violated policy when they failed to call the watch commander line as instructed by Supervisor B, and truthfulness, that Officer A violated policy by knowingly or willfully providing an untruthful, deceptive, or misleading answer to Supervisor B when asked about their contact with another watch commander related to the held assault report. Regarding unsatisfactory performance, we all agreed that it should be sustained. Regarding insubordination, it seemed that there was not intent to be insubordinate, so the recommendation was that it was within policy. Regarding truthfulness, we had some disagreement. The chain of command recommended that it be unfounded. I felt there was insufficient evidence either way, and the chief of police adjudicated it as unfounded. Here are your issues for discussion. I'm realizing if I leave my screen sharing the whole time, you can't see each other, so I'm going to shut them down.
Thank you.
If you need me to pull that back up, I can, but I felt like it's better for you to see each other.
I agree.
Okay.
Thank you. And if we want to see that screen again, we totally can. Essentially, we're going to go through those topics just based on our worksheet, so that's okay. So in the spirit of our new attempts at process, I think what I'm going to ask is each of us to go around and share any general comments that we have about the case review, and then I'll take us through 3 rounds. One looking at complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring. 1 round looking at policies, practices, and training, and then 1 looking at adjudication recommendations. I'm going to try to go in more or less the same order just for our own sanity. It's a little easier. I agree, Bernadette, when we're all sitting around a table and I can just look at somebody and then we can move on, but I know everybody's screen displays differently. So if it's okay, I think I'll start with Carolyn and then go to Rick. And so Carolyn, do you have any general comments that you would like to share as we open up this case review?
I do. I have a couple. The first one is just, again, kind of echoing what I said last month about muting the microphone for tactical purposes. I think that I heard, and I'm just asking for clarification here, did Skinner say that the EPD officers aren't supposed to mute at all anymore? Is that something that I heard, or did I dream that?
I think there's been some discussion. I don't know that that direction has happened yet. This case did occur in late of 2019, so it wouldn't have been in effect. And I need to check on that for you, Carolyn.
Right. I didn't think it would be in effect retroactively, but it just kind of jogged my mind and I wanted to bring that up. Another general observation I had, I kind of in light of all of the defund the police conversations that we're having, I did appreciate that the officer's first inclination was not to arrest this person, knowing that the hospital is probably the best place for this person to be at the time. So I understood that choice, even though there was probable cause. And I think that the officer told the victim and the other hospital employees that by not arresting this person, it might actually expedite getting the, what do we call the person? The patient? What do we call this person?
Suspect patient.
Okay. So by not arresting the patient, that would help expedite getting this person transferred to Oregon State Hospital. Is that what it's called? Which would be even a more appropriate place for them, as far as I could tell from the conversation. So it seemed like the officer was saying, I'm not going to arrest because it'll actually be better for you if I don't. But then the officer didn't do the one thing that would have helped expedite that to happen. So I thought that was a pretty unacceptable way to speak to people and then to not follow through with the thing that they're doing, because it makes it look like they just didn't want to do their job because it was their weekend coming up. And if you're making a call for safety for the staff and community, then it really needs to happen as soon as possible. And I think the fact that the patient was released is unacceptable, honestly, because the hospital staff have been saying that if they let this person go, that they would probably kill someone or kill them or die. That was something that was said. So that's not the kind of person we want on the street. And I think that the officer was negligent in a very large way. That was my observation. And then we'll get to more stuff later on.
Thanks, Carolyn. Rick, your turn.
No, I really don't have much to add to what Carolyn said. I think that the complaint intake was expected. Classification was okay. Investigation was usually, as usual, very good. monitoring was okay. And it seemed to take place pretty quickly. I don't have any further comment on that.
Thank you. Bernadette and then Michael.
So I think what's pretty interesting about this case is that it really isn't anything to do with what the officer did in their interaction with the public. Although I think the interaction with the public is quite telling on the reason for the complaint after the fact. And I know that normally we go around the table and say whether we know anybody or have any contact with anybody. I have done a ride along with one of the supervisors years and years ago when the supervisor was less than 2 years on the street. And I know the original complaining party as I'm working on the CRB through IA. But I don't think that affects my perception of any of this, although I think it is perhaps why the original complaint was made, is because they are much more aware of Blue Team and how processes work and things like that. I think if a different supervisor had perhaps been the original person that went looking for this report, we might not have seen this. That it's just kind of my perception of knowing the person making the complaint. I think what's also interesting that really stood out to me was that the officer we're looking at with although only 5 years with Eugene, I would say pretty good experience prior to this. And so being an FTO wasn't surprising from that perspective, but what was surprising is that—
Sorry, Bernadette, what's an FTO?
Oh, field training officer.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I thought the officer said that they were an FTO for about a year, but yes, field training officer. So that the individual we're looking at has enough experience, but then being an FTO means that they are out there training other officers. And the approach to this entire episode, the night of the event and after the event, I find it kind of troubling, the lackadaisical approach to the whole thing, that this person is now training our new officers, and that some of the answers weren't all that convincing with regards to why they took the actions or failed to take the actions that they did. And so I'm not really sure exactly where that will come in, in the conversation, but I think it's telling to me or concerning to me, that we have someone in a position training other officers, not following the protocols, maybe not to the point where they are going to get reprimanded for it, as we'll get into the allegations, but certainly cutting the corners. And we don't want somebody training officers to cut corners. So I guess that's kind of my overall thoughts on it. I did have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure where they'll come up. When we get into the allegation of truthfulness, is that going to be related only to a specific phrase that the officer said, or is it could it have been something else but would have had to have been specified? The fact that I see a statement that wasn't necessarily the allegation to be what I think is untruthful would not constitute untruthfulness, because it's not the one you guys were looking at. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. So we are required to give the employee notification of the specific thing that we are going to be asking them about. And so with something as serious as truthfulness, we try to be as specific as possible. I've seen it in other cases when there's sort of an overarching concern for the trustworthiness of their actions and their words. We tend to go with integrity violation instead of truthfulness, because it seems to capture that a little better. if someone is in an interview and they say something that we already know is likely to cause them trouble as an untruthful statement, we are supposed to stop that interview and then give them notification that we will be having to talk to you again about this other thing that you have now said that is now causing us to bring a different allegation. So that's sort of a long-winded answer, but we do try to be very specific because that allegation is so serious.
Okay, thank you. That was what I anticipated was going to be the answer. So yeah, so I'll have more comments when we get into the meat of the case. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernadette. Michael and then Bill.
Yep. So I had some similar similar thoughts to some of what Carolyn and Bernadette have already said. I was thinking about this question of the officer sort of saying, you know, I will do this, and this will lead to the DA fast tracking Oregon State Hospital admittance. And although I also agree that it's nice to divert people to mental health care when that's necessary, and it's clear that this person has a long history of instability. But the sort of lack of seriousness with which Officer A seemed to view this after leaving the scene, combined with their description of this later on, the justification by saying that this would likely be a harassment charge, when it was clear to every other, every supervisor that viewed it was clear to everyone else that it was an assault. The victim described the pain as an 8 on a 1 to 10, with 10 being natural childbirth, which leads me to believe that an 8 is very high for that person. Not having experienced natural childbirth myself, but having heard from people who have. So the characterization of this as likely harassment, combined with a lack of seriousness, suggests to me that this is in keeping with larger phenomena that we know about, people not viewing Black pain as seriously as white pain. I mean, this is something that we see in the health profession, where there's disproportionate rates of people's pain being given prescriptions or being taken seriously, or people being admitted in emergency wards. There's a lot of documentation on this, and I think this is another example of that. It doesn't have to be explicit. I think often it is simply, as what's so tragic about it, is that it's an implicit lack of seriousness with regard to Black suffering. So I think that might explain some of what happened here. I think that's my only general overall comment.
Thank you, Michael. Bill?
So as my first case, there was lots of questions as I ran through it. Initially I was, wondering, why the allegations were as they were. And I kind of had a little conversation at my orientation with Leah and Lindsay and Carolyn about, there's background that may have caused these to look at it. But when I watched the body cam video, I kind of thought there should have actually been more things that talked about unsatisfactory performance, some of what you've all brought up about how he handled it. And so a little confused about why that isn't then added to that, even though, or why the original supervisor didn't, when she watched the body cam, kind of go, why wasn't this done to do that? And so those are sort of things that came out in this. And then, and just trying to understand the truthfulness piece. And I think, Bernadette, your question that you had is sort of mine. It's like, what piece of what he talks about, do you kind of put down as, was he truthful here? Was it basically just that he didn't answer the supervisor the way she wanted to, or is it that it looked like he was trying not to be completely clear with what happened that night? So those are sort of my initial thoughts.
Thank you. So I agree, Carolyn, this brought up, again, my specter of the muting of the body-worn cameras. One officer actually did say muting for tactical. The other officer did not say why they were muting. In addition, muted before the interactions with the public were even over. So that was a bummer because we lost a lot of information. I had questions that it would be super helpful if I can understand, and maybe Jason might be the best person to answer this question. I don't know what the protocols are for supervisors reviewing body-worn footage. Like, this is the first time I can remember having this scenario where someone receives a call, can't see a report, goes back and reviews the body-worn of another officer. I'm just curious about, do all supervisors have the ability to go back and review officer body-worn footage? And if so, under what circumstances? That's just something I don't know about, and that's the first time I remember seeing that.
Yeah.
Can you clarify that for me a little bit, Jason?
Yeah, every supervisor does have the ability to watch any body worn unless it's locked for some reason, like a high profile officer involved shooting, they might lock those down. But any typical call, we can look at any body worn camera. Typically we wouldn't unless there's some reason to do so, like this one was flagged and there was some question about where the report was. So the supervisor went back and looked to try to determine that. Typically speaking, if there's a use of force or something higher liability, I would expect a patrol sergeant or a supervisor to look at the body worn, but that's not something we would routinely do, like on a normal assault report call or a burglary or something. We wouldn't typically go back unless there's a reason to do so.
That makes perfect sense. And I think it's great that that video is available because it could fill in a whole bunch of gaps when a report was not available and the supervisor was trying to follow up with staff about next steps. So thank you. That's super helpful. I learned something. The other thing, and maybe Leah, you might be able to answer this. When I had a little bit of a hard time when I was reading through the documentation. So it seemed to me that the victim in this case was indicating she thought she was targeted because she was Black. And the conversation kind of went back and forth a little bit, but multiple people said there were other people he could have hit in between when he kind of, the patient had sort of this explosive outburst and when the patient started hitting somebody. And that the victim indicated they felt like it was because they were Black. And when I was reading through, I was trying to figure out, like, was it flagged as a potential bias? It was, I think it was, but then I wasn't super sure when I read through the police report itself. So can you help me a little bit?
I am not sure off the top of my head. I can go back and I'll look at, because there's like a little section of a police report where it would say that it was or was not. So I can go back and look at that, and I will do that right now. And Jason may remember more clearly than I do.
And then Carolyn, I see your hand.
Am I muted? It says that. It says on the ATL form, it talks about interview and arrest for assault for bias crime. Does that indicate what you're asking?
Kind of. I guess I'm having a hard time just sifting through the different forms. I feel like it was mentioned in some forms and not mentioned in other forms, and I wasn't sure how it was entered into the police system writ large. Like, would it appear in the bias crime reporting, for example, the way that it was flagged?
I'll go check and get it.
Thank you. But Bernadette, I see you, and I'll just wrap up with, like, Michael, I agree. I had the same feeling that harassment didn't seem to make any sense, and that the victim's report of the experience and the pain seemed to be minimized and some problematic ways. So I appreciate that you brought that point up. And Bernadette, I see your hand.
Well, and I meant to also mention the lack of attention to detail, also with regards to the victim's name in the police report. It was, you know, there's 3 names there, and it was like, I still don't know what was the first name, what was the last name, what was the middle name, and what name they went by, because of how the police report just was not consistent with most other reports and being very clear as to, you know, what was the first name, what was the last name. And so it was just that kind of inattention to detail that just seemed to go through the event itself and then the process that brought us to this complaint.
Thank you. And I would echo the other point that you made. I also had concerns, and these are sort of perennial concerns at this point with such a relatively new police force by percentage, and who is training officers and how are they selected and are they really the best choice? This is something that we've seen multiple times as being sort of a problem and a challenge, and I was reminded of it again as you brought up, Bernadette, in your general comments. So, Jose, I want to make sure to ask, do you have any questions or comments or concerns at this point before we move on to the next section?
The one question that I had was already addressed as I'm following along, and that was about the supervisor's ability to review. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Carolyn?
I think it might be helpful to explain Jason's role in this, just because
Yes.
that hasn't been introduced, and I know that was confusing to me when I joined the board.
Thank you. Jason, can you briefly introduce yourself and tell us why you get to join us each month?
Sure, sorry about that. I should have done that earlier. My name's
It's my
Jason.
fault.
I'm a sergeant with the Eugene Police Department. I'm currently up in internal affairs. I'm the investigator that investigates most of the cases you guys will hear. I'm the only full-time investigator up there right now. So I get to come to these meetings once a month and answer questions if you guys have them.
Thank
I
you.
also think it's nice to introduce Vicky and Beatriz.
Absolutely. Good idea. Who wants to go first? Auditor, staff. Vicky, how about I pick on you? Oh, maybe she's not there. Maybe she's eating dinner. Like I wish I was. Beatriz, are you there? Oh, Vicky, you're there. Okay.
Yeah, yes. So
Thanks.
I am by title Senior Program Coordinator in the Police Auditor's Office, and I'm basically customer service and admin stuff. So I actually take most of the complaints and enter them in for the rest of the big wigs over there to classify.
Thank you, Vicky. Beatriz, can you introduce yourself a little and describe your role at the auditor's office?
Hi everyone, I'm Beatriz Sotero Hernandez. I work at the auditor's office as the community engagement coordinator and translation specialist, so a mouthful. But I am tasked with, letting the community know about the police auditor's office and also the civilian review board duties and responsibilities, as well as recruiting people to the CRB and, any outreach regarding both of our CRB and our auditor's office. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much. Good idea, Michael. Thank you. So let's move to look specifically at complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring. So this is kind of, oh, Leah, I see your hand.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. I just wanted to get back to you that yes, the checkbox was checked for bias crime, anti-Black bias crime, so it would have been included in the bias report.
Thank you. Super helpful. And Mark?
And I thought someone said the charge was harassment. It was assault 4 was what the affidavit said. So that was the ultimate charge from the affidavit. I don't know what that person would have been gone to court for, but that was from the affidavit.
Yeah, the officer had just mentioned during the interaction that they thought it would not be they kept mentioning harassment and not assault, and so
but I believe it's in the interview with Officer A, they said that the reason they didn't feel it was urgent to fill out the report that night was because it was probably going to be harassment. And it was Supervisor B who left the voicemail, who said that you clearly had probable cause for assault. And then when the police report was done, it was entered as an assault. So it was unclear to me whether, sorry to just, but it was unclear to me whether Officer A actually was intending to enter this as a harassment, or whether this was a retroactive untruthfulness, perhaps, of like coming up with, or lack of integrity, coming up with a justification after the fact for why they hadn't entered it. Right, so there's just the fact that in the interview they described it as probably harassment raised some alarm bells for me.
Thank you. So looking at complaint intake, classification, investigation, and monitoring. So that we've bundled those things. Carolyn, do you mind going first and then Rick?
I always appreciate it when somebody internally reports these things. I think that's a really good thing for the EPD to be doing and to continue to do. I do agree with the classification and the process. I did appreciate, again, I appreciate a lot of things, how quickly this happened. This is one of those cases that the investigation happened right away and it was thorough. And maybe a lot of, maybe not the most, but there were so many thorough things that happened, like the checking the access to the building and to see when they were there. There was another thing that I think Leah asked about during it, but there were some extra thorough things. Let me see if I can find that one. Oh, the review of Officer A's report submission history. I think that is a good thing to look into, and I appreciate that Jason started that and then decided not to continue. I think that was a reasonable decision on Jason's part, but I liked that was something that they looked into.
Thank you. Rick, and then Bernadette.
I don't have anything to add. I think I covered it in my initial statement.
Thank you. Bernadette, and then Bill? Or I'm sorry, Bernadette and then Michael.
Yeah, I think I appreciated the everything, the intake classification. I think my only concern in the investigation, but again, this is because we are able to listen to the question, listen to the answer, and then back up and go, wait a minute, is that really how they answered it? And it was the comment, and it'll come up in the truthfulness, is, you know, the timing of when this conversation happened in the hallway about the report, because Officer A was headed right in to talk to the supervisor, the watch commander, but then the Officer A's first comment was just had a little bit left in the report to write, which seems to support what the supervisor was saying is the Officer A was coming out of the room from writing the report. And, you know, maybe this is splitting hairs, but it kind of, to me, I would have liked to have a little bit more follow-up on trying to nail down, you know, maybe even step by step. It's going to be hard, you know, obviously, but, you know, how that interaction happened, because then there was also a comment that Officer A was there for a couple of hours, which the card reader, I think, said came in at about 8:15 and then left at 9:15. So that's not a couple of hours either. So it's just all those little those discrepancies that just kind of didn't, it just didn't add up. But I can understand why you kind of can't put all that together with regards to the allegation of truthfulness. But I just kind of wondered whether or not that maybe what was the other one that Leah said with regards to truthfulness, which is integrity, may have been something to look at in this case. That's all.
Thank you, Bernadette. Michael, and then Bill.
Yeah, I don't think I have much on this section, except also I wanted to thank Leah for thinking to ask for the card to be card access to be checked. I was curious. So we have a definite time when Officer A arrived. We have a probable time when the conversation happened, based on when the briefings took place. But or two possibilities actually for when that took place. The only record we have of when Officer A left is their statement that they texted their girlfriend or their partner at 9:21 or something. Was that checked? Was there ability to sort of view the text messages to see if that was the accurate time?
So Jason can probably speak to this better than I can, but basically we can ask for personal cell phone records, and requiring them is a kind of different ballgame. So I'm gonna let Jason talk before I just ramble.
Yeah, I don't recall asking for that information. I didn't at the time. It didn't blip on my radar as being particularly important during my interview, so I apologize if I missed something that was important. And as a slight correction, the prox card reader, when this employee came into the building, that's all that shows. It doesn't mean necessarily that they couldn't have been there before. There's oftentimes you'll follow another employee in or something like that, or you can go through records and get buzzed through. So it is possible, I'm not saying it did happen, but it is possible they could have been there before that prox card was scanned. But that's the first time we know of that prox card was scanned.
Thanks, Jason. Michael, anything else? And Bill, go ahead.
So I don't really have a lot to add. For being my first case, it appeared the investigation was thorough and you looked into a lot of different things. So I'm not sure I have the ability to comment too much on that. So I'll kind of leave it there.
Thank you. So I noted the same thing, Carolyn, as you did. I agree that internally reported complaints that are then investigated, that makes me feel like there is buy-in and trust within the organization to go through this process, and that officers are interested in holding other officers accountable. And I think that that's an important function of the auditor's office and then of this board. So I appreciated that this was an internally generated complaint. We have seen those in the past. This isn't the first one, but just that there's trust in this process, which is good. The issue on cell phones does sort of bring me to a general question, Jason, about cell phones. Are officers allowed to use their personal cell phones while on duty, or are they issued department cell phones for their work?
Yeah, they are issued department cell phones now, but often officers will carry personal ones too. There's no restriction as long as they're not dereliction of duty. They can't sit on the phone all day, but
Sure.
they can use their personal cell phone to call, their families or whatever.
So I would assume that a department cell phone would have a different level of accountability, like they wouldn't have the same kind of privacy expectations with an officer or with a department issued cell phone for correspondence and such. Is that accurate?
I would think so. Leah or Mark might speak to that more. That's a lawyer kind of question. I know there's rights of privacy, even if it's a department issued cell phone, but I haven't really had to cross that bridge. So I'll defer to one of them to answer that one a little bit more intelligently.
Thank you. Leah, any comments?
Mark jumping in.
You're the lawyer.
Lucky me. So there's two ways the city can help with cell phones. One is they can issue you a cell phone, and one is if you are using your cell phone for city business, they will sometimes give a stipend. We received guidance about what Part of your phone should be considered public record if you're using it for work. So there is a lesser degree of privacy in a city phone for sure. In a private phone that you are sometimes using for work, you're mushing two worlds together and you should be careful.
Thank you. I would imagine that will be something that comes up in general, like as we move forward in life with phones being so integrally involved. Okay. Has everyone had a chance to talk about complaint intake classification? Any other comments on that before we move to the next section?
You want to check in with Jose first?
Oh, thank you. Jose?
No comment.
Okay.
But thank you, Bernadette.
So let's move on to the section EPD policies, practices, and training. Carolyn and then Rick.
I think that I talked a lot. I mean, this kind of gets to the thing about if you say you're going to do something, you should do it. I think that is something that is a policy. It should be a policy in terms of public interfacing. And then I guess with training, I think that this is an officer we've seen a few times, if I'm remembering correctly. So I do kind of, it makes me question what kind of, well, the idea of discipline and if that could be more public to see what's been happening with these officers. And then also, since we've seen this person a few times, it does bring up the question about the field training officer portion of their job, which is kind of a roundabout training thing. Since they're doing training, I don't know what training there should be for this, but I think that's all I have to say. Maybe someone else can make more sense of what I was saying if they want to. No pressure.
I think you make sense, but we'll go to Rick.
I agree. I think she makes sense all the time. With respect to training, I think this, I think that trying to teach someone, you need to make your reports right away, or you need to make them within a certain period of time is easy to say, and you kind of just say, oh yeah, right. But this is a good example of what could be used in a training session, is to tell someone why you need to do it. The patient went on to hurt another patient, or at least involved in an assault with another patient. I don't know whether they were hurt, but that patient could have gone on once they were released, because no report was filed, could have gone on and hurt someone else in the public, which could have been a very bad situation. So I think it probably is a good example that could be used by training people to say, this is one reason why we require you to get these reports in, because we're not just for record keeping purposes, but it's can be important for purposes of protecting the public. So I thought that was the one thing that struck me about it.
Thank you. Bernadette and then Michael.
I think Rick is right. I think if there's not a policy, which it didn't seem like there was with regards to timeliness of reports, if a minimum, a training issue for officers to find out, this is what happens when a report is not timely done. But it would seem like there should be some sort of policy around, how quickly reports. It doesn't have to be they shall be done, in 24 hours, but, they should be done in a certain amount of time. And obviously, I would guess that it's dependent on the type and the seriousness of the crime. And I think that's why the officer continued to say harassment being a C misdemeanor. It's such a low level crime. It's not that big a deal, I think, is what the officer was trying to say. And then I just also wonder, how this fits into what is the training for an FTO, or is it just, we just kind of need somebody to train new officers. And so we're going to bring this person in. But I think those two things really, if there's not a policy around them, I just wonder what the training is with regards to how someone is chosen to be an FTO and then the training that they're given. And it was the, and in addition to the officer approval status, that there needs to be a supervisor that approves. And this officer was just so unclear that, well, I don't need approval for certain reports, but then couldn't articulate, well, what certain reports don't need approval. And yeah, I've done this over the weekend, but again, couldn't articulate what kinds of things, are that can be held. And maybe it's just because I've never seen this before, a report being held, or certainly for this length of time. Maybe it is more common. Maybe Jason can address that. Maybe it doesn't need to be addressed, but it just seems like certainly over a weekend is for personal injury, sort of, whether it's a harassment or an assault, and it's somebody in that mental hold. I think those things just mean that it needs to be done. We're not talking about, a bicycle that's been stolen, which is just so run of the mill. This is, I think even a harassment in this situation, it should not have been held, over a weekend. Overnight, I can understand, but not over a weekend. That's all.
I can speak to that a little bit regarding the report expectation. I've been detached from patrol for a few years now, but I believe the rules haven't changed. You can, with supervisor approval, hold a report overnight. So if you're at the end of your shift and you're going to come back in, you can do that with supervisor approval. Those are only done for lower level crimes, not if somebody's been taken into custody or there's a strong likelihood there's going to be follow-up. Like say there was a domestic violence situation where one half left, but it's likely they're going to come back before you're back on shift. They would make you stay and complete that report. That would be one example. There's not a time, it would be a very rare time that a supervisor would allow you to hold a report over your weekend. That's just not something that happens. So occasionally one day, never over a weekend as a general rule. As far as the field training officers, they put in for that. They have to get their supervisor approval to be considered for it. We have an internal process for that. And if they're selected for that, then they do attend. I think it used to be a 40-hour FTO training mini academy that kind of teaches them how to grade and things like that. That I'm maybe talking out of school. Like I said, I've been detached for a while and it's been a long time since I've been an FTO, but that's kind of how it was when I did it several years ago. And I don't think it's changed since then.
And Jason, when you say that there's a policy with regards to getting supervisor approval for low-level reports, is that a written policy or is that just everybody just knows it sort of thing?
I believe it's a policy, but I'd have to check into it to get back to you.
Okay, no, that's okay.
I know those are the rules. I know that you need to ask permission from your supervisor to hold a report, and we don't allow people to hold them over the weekend. So there's always a mad scramble on people's Fridays to get their reports done because they know they can't hold them over the weekend.
Thank you.
Yep.
That's super helpful. Thank you, Jason. Michael, and then Bill.
Yeah, so I had a couple of policy, see, I never know what is exactly policy, but a couple of things. So I was surprised. Well, so the voicemail was, it was unclear to me whether the voicemail was left on the personal cell phone or if this was a work cell phone, but it was great that Officer A had the voicemail to play. So that it was entered into the interview transcript. I was a little surprised that some of the there weren't. I guess the EP doesn't keep records of phone calls. It would have been really helpful to have known what was said on some of the phone calls, since that was what there was some disagreement over. I think that. Also I won't say that. I was also, so there was some the reason that Officer A said that they didn't get the voicemail right away because they live somewhere outside of the city, and I just wanted to observe that as an interesting thing, since I know there's been conversation in other cities about requirements to have officers live in jurisdictions that they police. And this would seem to be one among many reasons why that might be good. But I think that was, and then this has been talked about several times, but the BWV muting, I think also came up to me as a policy issue.
Thank you. Bill?
So I guess, and I hope I'm not backing up with these questions, but so when we talk about unsatisfactory performance, we seem to be focused only on the report writing when that was done, when it seems that the real question was, should he have arrested him? Should he have or cited him there, which he didn't do either one, which was really the main problem for the unit. And I'm sorry if I'm using, I should say Officer A, I'm trying to catch on, trying to work better at that. So why wasn't that, really part of the unsatisfactory performance? Because that seems like that was the bigger issue, and it gets back to the victim not being believed that this was something that put her and everybody else still in some further danger, whether it was right to leave the person there or not. But that wasn't ever brought as part of this investigation. So that's where a little bit is confusing to me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. Leah, can you answer that?
I could try. This is one of the reasons why I really like the CRB. Honestly, so this came in, as you know, it came in internally, and there was this list of behaviors that were concerning. During the course of an investigation, if we're watching body worn and we see something else, often, yes, we do add allegations, notify the employee, interview them about them, all of that. That's definitely well within our range of opportunities to pursue. And sometimes we miss things. I think we were concerned with that. Of course, that was alarming that nothing actually happened here. I think they were able to go out and get the suspect at some point, but things had already happened. Like negative impacts had already occurred. And so I don't recall. Now, my memory has been blitzed, but I don't recall having those discussions about adding that at the time. And I wish that we had, because I think that's definitely another example of poor performance from this employee. That's not what we expect. That's not what we want. That they left without actually citing, and then also did not write a report is obviously not what I expect. And I don't know, Mark, if you remember better than I do.
I don't remember. Bill, we try not to, I don't know if it's within our peruse to get into that probable cause area of whether or not someone should be arrested or cited. I think we do that certainly on the APA cases, the domestic violence cases. I know that we've done that in the past, but on the other ones, we try not to go there. But I think in this particular case it was pretty obvious, now that we look back at all of it. And again, this was generated by a supervisor. Sometimes when you see, I want to clarify for the listening public too, sometimes when you see internally generated complaints, a lot of those, I shouldn't say a lot, many of those come from our office. And and historically we've categorized them as internally generated complaints when in fact it's Leah or I that bring forward like a use of force case. Having said that, this was definitely internally generated. But you make a great point there. And again, historically we have tried not to be that organization that decides whether an officer has probable cause or not, but I think this was pretty obvious in this case. And like Leah said, appreciate you pointing that out.
Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Bill. So I don't have anything more to add. I agree that this issue of field training officers and how they're chosen and what kind of training, and that this this was not exemplary police work on any number of levels, and so it's troubling to think that this person would be training future officers. That the muting was an issue, as we've seen in the past. The other officer who was there, the trainee, I presumably did say muting for tactical. The officer A involved did not, and in fact muted their body-worn camera before the interaction with the public was over. We then didn't have any of the conversation that happened with the supervisor regarding whether the arrest should be made or not. And then, of course, it's weeks later when that supervisor is being interviewed and their memory is not terribly precise about it. And so we're missing information because of that muting. Mark, I see your hand. I agree with those things. And Bill, I think it's a really good point. I do see the nuances of whether the person should or should not be taken into custody, considering the most appropriate place for that person, given their mental health condition, and whether, treatment in the hospital was a more appropriate venue than the jail. But certainly the citation seems like a bare minimum of what could have been done in that circumstance. And then, of course, timely report writing. Before I get to you, Mark, Jose, I'm going to ask if you have any questions or comments.
Yeah, as I'm going to try to spend the first few meetings listening and learning to the practices of this board. But one of the things that I would like to input here is that I find it difficult to think about motives after the fact, and that for me, as I hear everybody talking, I would like to think, in the future, this question about truthfulness, this question about, laziness, this question about, or these overlapping questions about truthfulness, leading into questions about, okay, let me start over again. Motive, truthfulness, those two things overlapping with someone perhaps being tired or not wanting to do their work. The factor that I think the important thing to consider here is the fact that it wasn't done despite someone's motives. And so it's difficult for me to think and talk when I'm guessing at somebody's motives. So that's what I want to contribute here, and the way that I'll be thinking about these cases moving forward is how to talk about them when motives are when anytime we're talking about this, we're really reading into somebody else's motives. So yeah, thanks.
Motives is super complicated for so many reasons. It's a super good point. Mark, I saw your hand earlier.
Yeah, just wanted to make a point again for the audience and for the new members and maybe the old members. Since I got here 11 years ago, I've had trepidations about the what I consider to be lack of structure of the field training officer program. They get a 10%, they can sign up for it, they get a 10% pay boost while they're doing it, but they don't have a dedicated team, for example, of field training officers. Is if you sign up for it and they appoint you for a while and you stay in good graces, then you can keep doing it. And so I have expressed those concerns to Chief Skinner and Deputy Chief Jepson, and they have indicated that they want to refine that program. But I know they have a lot of things on their plate right now. I consider it an unrefined program at this point. And for just the points that you've mentioned, and I think we had a while back the case involving the search of the truck where there was a field training officer that was telling his trainee to search the truck or didn't stop him from doing that. So again, I think it certainly is a program that needs refined, and I'm glad that you brought up that issue.
I think it's particularly critical given the number of new officers as a percentage of the overall force. So thanks, that's helpful context, Mark. In the interest of time, I'm going to try to scooch us along to adjudication recommendations. So I've been going kind of in the same order just for my own Zoom sanity. Sorry, it's a little bit boring, but Carolyn, if you could go first, and then Rick.
Okay, I would agree. I do agree with the auditor's office's adjudications of sustained within policy and then insufficient evidence. I think that Leah in her adjudication made some good points about there just wasn't insufficient evidence. There wasn't enough evidence to figure out really if it was within policy or unfounded. I think that the chief's description of why he chose to say unfounded wasn't as compelling as Leah's saying insufficient. I feel like I've harped on this a few times, but the truthfulness, I think, is a really important part of the policing, and especially these days when every move that the police is making is being held under a microscope, and I think that it should be held under a microscope. If we see that an officer is lying about something that seems insignificant like this one possibly could, it does bring into question the whole integrity of that officer and of the whole department. So I think that truthfulness is a serious allegation, but I think that it should be taken seriously also, because it does corrode the trust overall. And that is the end of my statement.
Thank you, Carolyn. Rick, and then Bernadette.
I agree with what Carolyn said. I think that I concur with number one on I believe that Leah is correct that it should be insufficient evidence on the truthfulness issue, and on insubordination, I thought it was within policy. So I agreed with what the auditor's position was on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernadette, and then Michael.
I think I would have found the truthfulness to be have founded, given two things that I saw. One was the officers, the supervisor coming in, the officer saying that they were headed right back to talk to the watch commander, but yet when the watch commander was spoken to, the comment was made that the officer was in the report room and only had a little bit left to go on the report, which to me indicated they had been in there for some time writing the report and didn't come directly in to look for the watch commander. And you couple that with before the tape was played, the message was played, the first comment when the question was put to the officer A, about whether the officer was looking for the watch commander, they said their first comment was that they were to call the watch commander, that they got a message and they were to call the watch commander. And then after playing the message, only then did Officer A say that they thought the important part of the message was to get the report done, which wasn't mentioned really in the message at all. So I think I would have I think I would have leaned more towards truthfulness being, have been proven, sustained. But otherwise I agree with what's been said.
Thank you, Bernadette. Michael, and then Bill.
Yeah, so oh, now I lost that. Change pages, now I lost that. So I agree as well with the finding of sustained for allegation 1, and I agree with Bernadette with allegation number 2 on truthfulness. I also would have found that founded. I find it very unlikely that looking at this police report, which is 2 pages, single spaced, and mostly doesn't look like a first draft. If they arrived at 8:16 and texted their girlfriend that they were ready to leave at 9:21, and in that time had 2 conversations with the supervisor, I don't know if I would have been able to complete this report in that time, especially if I didn't start it until after the first of those conversations. This is a very fast report to have done in well under an hour. So I'm more skeptical, I think, than others about truthfulness. For the, what was the third one about? Whatever it was, for allegation 3, I agree with the deputy auditor, but I also think that I find the chief's reasoning for finding it unfounded to be reasonable.
Thank you. Phil?
So I mean, I agree with the unsatisfactory performance as sustained. The insubordination, I agree with, and that kind of brings me to where I was struggled a little bit with the truthfulness, because if we found that he wasn't insubordinate with his actions that night, then what he said he did, even though there's some, whether he met with them right away or not, but if that wasn't considered insubordinate, it was hard for me to believe that what he said he did versus what Officer A said he did versus what the supervisor said that they did in their interaction was a little tough for me to kind of meet that. And so I kind of felt it leaning more towards the unfounded piece than insufficient evidence. So.
Thank you. For me, I agreed with the auditors or deputy auditors recommendations for the adjudication. I definitely couldn't get to unfounded. Unfounded to me means it is proven to be incontrovertibly not true, and I definitely am skeptical. I, at the very least, think it was insufficient evidence. I hear Michael and Bernadette's arguments though, and think I could be swayed, but I most certainly agree that it was insufficient evidence, and that the truthfulness claim was not unfounded. I think it was questionable at best, but agreed with the within policy for insubordination and the sustained allegation for unsatisfactory performance. Jose, do you have any questions or things that you want to add? I think, oh, I don't see you. Oh, no, there you are. Sorry.
I second Michael's comments.
Thank you. So at this point, we're running just a couple minutes behind. Is it okay with everyone if we extend the meeting by 10 minutes to have a brief auditor's report and then to make our closing comments? Is that okay? Thumbs up? Okay, anybody opposed to that? No, okay, let's forge ahead. So Mark, auditor's report, and then we can go through our closing comments.
Okay, and I'll try to be brief, but I also want to touch on some of the things that were touched upon for our viewing audience. There was discussion about background checks for board members, and a lot of that has to do with the confidential police and criminal records that the person who would be selected for the board would have the right to review. And so there's pretty stringent requirements. All of us on our staff have to go through that. And it's not only just a local, it's really not very much local. It's more of a federal and state thing. With regard to the disciplinary records that you talked about for the public, and I'm just looking at them right now, there's It's House Bill 4207, passed on June 30th. So now there is a public record of every police officer who has lost their license or had it suspended. Let's see, 2020 House Bill 4207. So I'm looking at the database right now. There's since 1971, there's been 1,728. Almost all of them are revoked. There are very few suspended. So within the state of Oregon, about 35 a year, including correction officers, lose their certification. I checked to see some of the folks that we've had from Eugene, and there'll be 2 more that are added to that list that I know of. So there's that accountability piece. It just lists names. If you want the files, then you'd have to make a public record request. Again, I'm speaking more to the public about this, but that did pass. There was a brief discussion about how the review board members are picked. So council picks all boards and commission members at the same time. There's an application process that begins in January and ends in end of March. For the review board, they added into the ordinance where the mayor and I choose a subcommittee to review the applications and make recommendations to city council. What happens is we get a very short time frame to do that. The applications come in on March 31st. We get them about April 7th, and oh, by the way, April 18th, they're going to interview candidates. So we've used a lot of the same people. I think we've always had a very diverse group from our community, and certainly if any of you between now and January, February, March know of someone that would be good to help review those applications, please submit them to us. We work really hard, and Beatrice worked really hard to get applicants to the Civilian Review Board. There's a lot of reasons. Lindsay mentioned stipends, for example, as a deterrent for some people. So certainly if you know people that might be interested, that would be very helpful. But that in a nutshell is what happens with the mayor and I. We sit down, we usually try to invite about 16 people, hoping we get 10. Because again, it's hard to get people together in a short period of time for a meeting to review those applications. They only get the application materials to review. They don't get the time to conduct interviews. Let's see. A lot of things that you talked about are bargaining things. I think that collectively bargained agreements. So in other words, you just can't impose them in your bylaws. And or you would have to have council open up the ordinance for that. So there's a lot of pieces to those puzzles. As I said, there's several, I think, provocative cases that I think would be important for the board to review. And so I think as we plan forward, give that consideration, because I think that was one of the primary responsibilities of the review board. I'm looking at my notes, that's why I'm not looking at the camera. In terms of communications to complainants, if you want to add a layer with the review board, but I think we do a real good job of communicating with complainants, and after a case is over, I think Leah especially we write rather detailed letters to people. Sometimes we deal with a population that moves around a lot, so we probably, Vicki could tell you, but we get a lot of return mail. And so we do try to reach out as much as we can on those cases, if you want to add a layer for the review board. And I think finally, at least for the public, Michael and I are going to be on the program for the City Club for their July 24th session. I think we'll probably quote film a few days before that to discuss the good, bad, and ugly of the criminal justice system in America in an hour or so. It'll be interesting to see what direction that goes. I don't remember off the top of my head who else is on the panel, but there's about 4 or 5 people on the panel. So
it's a two session thing.
2 session. And so I didn't know it was a second session as well. But in any case, that one will air July 24th. And I don't know if there'll be a second airing of that as well. I know the following Monday night, it's also on KLCC. So we'll be talking about those things. Other than that, before the police response to the protest and before the vehicle incident, we were pretty much at maximum capacity, and we had those 2 things added to our full plates. And I really appreciate the hard work of Leah, Vicky, and Beatrice. They've all really stepped up, and Beatrice has done tons of translation for the city on all the COVID things and talking about the protest issues and things like that. So I just can't say enough about the great work that they're doing for us, and especially when I was on the disabled list there for a little while, and they all just really stepped up, and I really appreciate it. I had talked before about ensuring that the compensation issues in our office were fair, and we've reached that point, I think, for the 3 employees now, and I think that was very important to get that done. So I want to thank you all for your service, for the work that you're doing here. Thank you. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thanks, Mark. Does anybody have any questions for Mark? I think we can proceed then to closing comments. We'll just go in the same order if that's okay. Carolyn, do you mind leading us off?
Nope, that's fine. I just wanted to, again, welcome Bill and Jose and the public attendees. I think that it's really good to see people participating, and just that's it. Have a good month.
Thank you. Rick, and then Bernadette.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll echo what Carolyn said, and I would also commend the staff of the auditor's office for the work that they're doing. It has to be a huge undertaking to deal with the community impact case and to deal with everything that's been thrown at them over the last month or so. I'm pretty proud to be associated with you. Thank you.
Bernadette, and then Michael.
I appreciate everything that, yes, the auditor's office does, what the rest of my colleagues on this board do. I think what's going to be really interesting is to actually hear Jose's closing comments, because he is kind of the ears of the public tonight, in the sense that he wasn't able to review everything we reviewed, and is able to then tell us, it's like, what made sense, what didn't make sense. And so going into the next meetings, he will have a perspective that, if any of us ever had that perspective, we've completely forgotten what it was. I think most of us got our background checks done and got our first board, book, and went into the first meeting, eyes wide open, trying to understand the process. But I think to be able to sit through an entire meeting, and as a member of the public would, it gives him some insights and abilities to tell us and then show us what we kind of miss in how we do our jobs, to give more transparency within the parameters of what we can and can't do. So thanks, Jose, for sticking in there, even though you didn't have everything that we had. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bernadette. Michael, and then Bill.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, my alarm's going off. Yeah, I just wanted to also, I'm looking forward to this next year. And I wanted to thank Leah for all of the voluminous documents that you sent us and gave us access to for preparing for this meeting and for the subcommittee meetings. It was extremely helpful, not just for this, but also for my my working life. Yeah, I think that. Oh, and Lindsay, thank you for when you call on us for telling us also who you're calling on next, because it keeps me from being like taken by surprise when I have to speak.
No problem. We're all trying to learn how to make this a tiny bit better. So Bill and then Jose.
I just want to say thank everyone for the work tonight.
And Jose, go ahead.
Thanks, Bernadette, for giving me a very generous framing. You know, I think that issues of the biggest thing here is transparency, and to me, that's where structural implicit bias is living and going to be coming out. That said, I think everybody did a pretty good job today of not using acronyms and jargon that are really like, you know, like within groups and communities are really efficient. But I didn't see anything like that tonight. And I'm impressed by the way that the committee and the city is taking on issues like gender pronouns. I think that that's something that constituents and a lot of younger people really care about and take seriously as matters of justice and equity these days. I didn't see, I mean, I think I was able to follow the conversation pretty well, especially after having this mental drain during COVID, you know, pandemic times. So I just want to say thanks to everybody for their efforts, and job well done in making it accessible and keeping the language transparent and accessible as well. Thanks.
Thank you. So yes, welcome again to Bill and Jose. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the rest of you. I'm always really impressed. Everyone shows up, like you've done your work, you've done your homework. I really benefit so much from hearing your various perspectives, and it's a great pleasure to be part of this body because of all of you. So thank you. And thank you to staff for supporting us in really significant ways in a time when I know you're barely keeping your noses above the water with the workload. I guess the final thing I would say was just about transparency. And as you all know, because I harp on this every single time, I don't think these cases that we review should be viewable by only us. I think everybody should have access to this kind of information. I get that there are privacy concerns, and I get that we need to like wade through those things when it comes to access to body-worn video and such, but I think that more transparency for more people is better, and that bodies like this still have a role to specifically look and shine a light on how these processes work, right? How the auditor's process works, how police investigations work, how these things work. And there should still be dedicated people looking at that, but that I think more access to more information for more people would be better. So I will continue to advocate for that, fully acknowledging that is far beyond my purview at this table and is a state level issue. On the issue of transparency, I think kind of the next level for a body like this would be more insight into the follow-up. What happens when an allegation is sustained? What does that mean? Are there disciplinary matrices? So if there's an unsatisfactory performance, is there a matrix for what happens to somebody who sustains such an allegation? I think these types of things would help to provide some feelings of confidence that there are teeth and repercussions and consequences for these things that I think that there probably are, but there's no way for me to really know, right? That part of the process is invisible to me, and I don't like that. So I think that's where, in terms of this body and this city and this community, where I would like to see us go. That's something that I think is more within our purview. I would like to know more. To be clear, I'm not advocating that we should have anything to do with the actual determining what kind of discipline. I'm just saying more transparency about what happens when allegations are sustained, for example. I hear from community members with their concern that we go through this process, but that it's toothless. And it's like, I don't think that that's true, but I also can't demonstrate to them with anything concrete that it isn't true. And that bothers me. So thank you all for participating and standing in this gap and being the people who look through all these things. It's a privilege to have access to this information. I appreciate that you all take that very seriously and come to this table ready to discuss and share your insights and your perspectives. It means a lot to me. We will circulate a poll to decide about an August meeting that can work for everyone, where we can figure out about our own processes and if there's anything else that we want to change about them, and then plan on resuming our typical meetings in September at the usual time and place, including a case review and public comment and those things. So thank you all heartily from me, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.